So welcome to this Wellington Water Committee meeting on the 27th of May. I just to start off by saying we are live streaming the meeting, and that Mayor Foster, Mayor Bajan and other members, we also have member Narita Hooper on via Zoom as well. Just to be mindful, if you could use your virtual hand if you have a question or would like to speak, that just makes our life a bit easier. And if you could have your video on as well, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so just moving through, we have the emergency procedures which we'll put up on the screen. If you could take a moment to briefly read those procedures. If you are feeling unwell at any point, of course, do feel free to leave. Make it a little bit bigger, if that's okay. Zoom in. And so yeah, so please feel free to take a moment to read them. And if at any point you are moving around or going about, if you'd like to wear your mask, that would be appreciated. And if you feel more comfortable wearing a mask generally, please do so as well. No problems at all. So I'll move through to the opening karakia, which we'll put up on the screen. Please feel free to join me. Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, e he aki ana te arakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihei moriora. Okay, moving through to apologies. So we do have apologies from member Lee Rahina August and Kirsty Tamanui as Lee's alternate. So we'll move those apologies. Do we have any other apologies? No. Okay, so we'll move those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Guppy, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, and we'll move through. Moving through to public comment. We don't have any members of the public who wish to comment. No. Conflict of interest declarations. Do we have any conflicts to declare from members? No. Okay, so moving straight through to item 5, which is the Chair's statement. So before we get into the agenda, I'd just like to make a few brief comments. Since we last met, a significant update has been made on the Three Water reform process. So I thought I'd briefly touch on that. Obviously, there was a large announcement made out in Porirua, hosted very well by Mayor Baker and the Porirua team, which particularly looked at signing off the majority of the Three Waters Working Group recommendations and set out a bit of a pathway around what reform is going to look like over the coming months. So I actually was quite pleased personally with the government's response in taking on those working group recommendations, and I think that's been also shared by LGNZ. And of course we have some way to go, and there's going to be quite an important process through the select committee stages to be able to scrutinise the detail, because a lot of the devil will be in the detail of how this is ultimately set up. And I know we'll all be participating through that process. Also, I had the fortune of, in the last couple of days, heading to the water conference in Hamilton, and just to get a bit of an overview, I think I was actually the only mayor there, which was, I suppose, generally you have more of the water professional services industry at this particular conference, but it was good to be able to get their perspectives and the feeling of how transition is working and looking towards ultimate reform as well. So it's really important that we continue to work with those conversations. And there was a good contingent of Wellington Water staff there as well, I think about 20 who represented well, also giving feedback. Fraser Clark presented extremely well at the conference, so just passing on my acknowledgement to him, and a lot of really good feedback from Wellington Water's participation. Just also to give a brief update on the fluoride inquiry, there was a press release that was sent out, which you may touch on, Linda, in regards to a bit of a delay in that report coming back, but I'll leave that for any comments you may wish to make. I had the fortune of visiting a couple of our sites here in the Hutt in particular, but also talking to the team at the Waterloo water treatment plant and Barber Grove project. So that was a pretty, I won't talk too much about that because it's a little bit Lower Hutt centric, but again, a good opportunity to go out and see the team on the ground and the awesome work that they're doing. So just an acknowledgement again to them. Okay, so I don't have anything further to share on that. So I will move through to the minutes. Does any member have a question relating to the correctness of the minutes from the meeting of the 18th of March?
Mr. Chair, can I raise an issue, please?
Mayor Foster.
Yeah, it's just, it seemed to me that looking at the minutes, the public minutes, and I presume we're dealing with both public and the public excluded minutes here, but the public minutes are very, limited.
Mayor Foster, public minutes. No, public excluded minutes get dealt with in public excluded.
Okay, right. Okay, look, I'll deal with that later on. With the public minutes, I've got no issue with it. It's the public excluded minutes I was interested in.
Okay. And I should also say welcome Mayor Foster
Thank you.
to the committee, for those of you who are aware that who has replaced Councillor Rush, who I know is going through some personal things. So great to have you on the committee, Mayor Foster.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move the minutes from the meeting of Friday the 18th of March as confirmed as true and correct. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Baker. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
No. Declare that carried. So moving through to item 7, which is the Water Reforms Regional Update. So I'd like to ask Dougal List, who is the Program Director for Water Reforms for the Wellington region, to provide an update. I believe you should have a copy, but there was a presentation here as well. Over to you, Dougal. Just, it should be green.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to build on what was outlined in the Chair's report, really the key update was from the government on the 29th of April, where they really put forward that commitment to proceed with the Three Waters reforms. I think what has come through very clearly from that intent to proceed was a very positive response to the Governance and Representation Working Group report. The government's basically said we are looking to accept almost all of the recommendations that were developed by that working group, which is a very positive response. But as the Chair has outlined, we're really still waiting to see some of the detail of how that plays out in practice. So in terms of key updates, really that update on the 29th of April, intent to proceed, and we're now expecting that the bill will move forward into its first reading and into the select committee process. And I understand that that first reading could happen as soon as next week. We'll wait to see. We don't have a firm date on that. So if that is the case, then we would expect the bill process to be occurring through the select committee process through June, July, August, that kind of time period. When we have further detail on that, we'll make sure we provide an update on that. And as mentioned in previous meetings, we're expecting that there is 2 rounds of legislation in relation to the water services entities, one mid this year, one late this year, and also a bill on economic regulation, which is a really important plank of that as well. So what that'll mean for councils and Wellington Water over the next few months in terms of this policy process is reviewing the content of the draft bill and considering approach to the select committee process. And that will obviously we'll do some work as a region across the councils to support each council, but each council is likely to put their own submission forward. And there'll be, I suspect, quite considerable interest from the public about the bill process and the detail of that as well. Just briefly picking up the government response to the working group report, as noted, the government's really given a very positive response to this, but there is still quite a lot of detail to follow, which we'll really see in the legislation. So looking to protect the ownership model through a shareholding model for councils, where councils would hold a shareholding interest in the water services entity on behalf of the public. Strengthening of accountabilities through the statement of intent, statement of performance expectations, etc. Very strong support around co-governance and Te Mana o Te Wai as a korowai across the water reforms, and also strengthening and clarifying those expectations around te tiriti as well. But really we will see the detail in the bill. So a lot of the positive response by the government was caveated with things like, we still need to work through some of this detail with Standards and Poor's, or we're considering how this would work in practice, which we'll see more of in the bill. The real engine room of the reforms, of course, is the transition process and the National Transition Unit. They have provided a recent 90-day plan of their work program, which provided a little bit more guidance around the intent of the National Transition Unit and their transition process. But I think what we're still really finding is that there is not a very clear pathway as to how the transition will occur and what that means for councils and what we need to do. Probably the best analogy that I've discussed with others over the last few days is in a process like this, there is a marriage and there is a divorce. And the DIA have been more focused on the marriage and the creation of the new water services entity, but there are a lot of loose ends and matters that will need to be tidied up and resolved in the divorce side of things as well, which is particularly where the impacts fall on councils. So they're resetting their work program. We'll have a clearer path of how and when they intend to work through the reforms process, but by July. So as said, there's still some lack of clarity in terms of what that means on councils. We still don't have clarity around how funding support for councils will work. There has been a clear signal that there will be some funding support for councils, but we're not sure how much that will be, or the conditions around that for the costs of transition. So as per the papers in the agenda pack, we are strengthening and developing a more coordinated approach to transition planning across the Wellington Water family, to make sure that we've got a really good, clear path of the risks, key challenges, tasks and responsibilities over the next 2 years, and are able to hold the transition unit to account, as well as being really clear on how we work together. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and happy taking questions.
Thank you, Dougal. Is there any questions from members? No, very good. Thank you, Dougal. Okay, so I'll just move a recommendation that we note the update received. Do I have a seconder for that? Mia Guppy, any discussion? Any discussion? No. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, transition planning for Three Waters reform. So this is on page 27 of the agenda. We'll have Dougal remain there, and also Wendy, who will speak to this item, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. Yes, so this report addresses the formalisation of a kind of system we've been quasi-operating for some time around water reform. So as you know, there's already quite a long path that the government has taken around this, but now is that watershed moment, I think, that we really need to formalise the structure and move to a stronger reporting model. It's basically 2 years until the go live date of the new entities, and the government has shown a strong intent in the announcement that the Mayor Barry referred to in proceeding. So we're looking to formalise this. This will it'll be quite a drag on local authorities in the region, but we do think it's a critical point. Dougal, was there anything else that you wanted to note? That's all. Thanks.
Great. Mayor Foster.
Just one question. It's a fairly generic one here. Wendy, what conversations, you noted the potential for a drag on the councils collectively. How are the conversations going with DIA about essentially compensating councils for the time, the staff time, the management time, etc., which is taken from them from other activities that as a result of their reforms?
We haven't had specific advice about that, but we think that there is an imminent announcement around transition funding, and it's not clear what that will be. There's already been some support given for some aspects of the reform, so some councils are participating in some data. Every council is participating in the data retrieval process for DIA, but some are participating in more in-depth parts of that, and there's been some funding offered to that. It's pretty modest at this stage, but it's clear that DIA knows that that's an issue. But we would expect in the next month, Dougal, to hear, maybe sooner than that. I think it'll probably be timed around the bill, which is for early June. So we're pretty close to early June. So I think the next month before the end of the financial year, we will have a better idea about a lot of that funding question.
So is somebody in active discussion with DIA as opposed to simply waiting to hear from them?
We're always in an active discussion with DIA, actually. Well, Dougal in particular is.
Cool. Okay, well, look, if we keep pushing that, that'd be really appreciated.
Just to add to what Wendy said, it's probably one of the key issues that we have been raising, Mayor Foster, repeatedly, loudly. We have been doing a lot of work to estimate the effort required across council. It's council officer time, it's specialist advice and support, legal, property, HR, those kind of matters. So we've got some pretty good understanding of potential resource and cost requirements for the councils over the next 2 years. But it very much depends on what the DIA actually will do at their end, what their National Transition Unit will do, what their water services entity will do, what they'll procure nationally. So it's been very challenging to build a very clear task plan or resourcing plan, or to come up with a firm budget. But we've got some pretty good basis for negotiation with DIA.
Sounds good, and I look forward to hearing more about that.
Any other questions? Mayor Guppy.
At what point? I mean, the DIA have known that there's going to be issues and costs and the talking and it pushed out and pushed out. I mean, the only way to get an answer, at some point, we need to put our hands up and say, look, I'm sorry. I mean, that all the information you talked about, the collection and the work, if we put our hand up here in the Wellington region and said, that's it, we're not participating as far as, and force the issue. Because I was on a recent Zoom meeting, and I can tell you that comments made from the top down about councils getting compensation, etc., and the fact that we're under extreme pressure, I thought was arrogant and poorly answered. And I don't think, look, it'll go on, and we'll be the ones that won't be able to do business as usual because we'll have staff stretched. I think as a region, I'm going to urge Upper Hutt, for us, our city, to be doing it, put our hands up and said, sorry, till there's compensation for staff and for all of us, we're not part of it. You find the information yourself. And I think we're at that point.
I guess it's a judgment call about when that's the appropriate time to do that. I agree there will be a moment that we should stand up and do that. We're all aware that Internal Affairs have had some quite significant turnover in staff. We've now got somebody at the head of the transition unit who understands the sector issues very well. coming from the sector. So, you know, each council will make their own judgment call about that. But I think probably right now is, you know, while we're still waiting for that announcement, if it's made in the next couple of weeks, it's probably neither here nor there. But that is a judgment call, I think, for each council to make.
Mayor Bajan.
Yeah, thanks. Following on from the comments from Wayne, to what extent is the request for information having on Wellington Water's OPEX as opposed to the individual councils' OPEX? So we can object as councils individually, but is there a financial consideration within Wellington Water outside of that?
We're participating in the program work that Wendy and Dougal are leading, and we're recording all of the inputs we provide into that system. But at the moment, my judgment is it's relatively modest and it's not having a big bearing on our performance. But this is only the early stages of it, really. We're expecting it to ramp up significantly. So addressing this issue and what you're talking about is the right thing to do.
Well, I, as a result of that, I'd suggest that as individually as councils, we pressure as well. But I am aware of the work that's going on in this area, and it's a shame that they haven't made a decision earlier.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. So I'll move to the recommendations 1 through to 5. Which is in front of us. Is there any discussion? Do I have a seconder for that? Mayor Baker, any discussion? Mayor Foster?
Yeah, look, I just think it's worth us actually noting specifically that, that the issue that Wayne and Alex and I have raised, that we are wanting to have some real clarity pretty soon from DIA about essentially compensating councils for the time, councils and Wellington Water for the time that is going into their reforms.
Yeah, I'm happy to include that. So just
thank you.
If we could get some words, do you have some suggested words, Mayor Foster?
I think if they're all notes at the moment. If we, actually, it's probably more given that this has come from Wendy, is that right? And Dougal?
Yep.
I think if we could say, if we can ask officers to continue to stress to DIA the importance of recompensing councils and Wellington Water for the personnel resources, or for just say the resources which will be required to support their reforms, something along those lines.
Yep. Happy with that, Mayor Guppy?
Personally, I agree, but I think we should actually go public. Look, if you want to get a result, they'll keep pushing it out. We need to front it. And it's going to be an impost on council, so we need to front it. And I think we should be putting out a press statement from this committee today that it's been discussed, and we have grave, real concerns about the time and the resources that it's taking.
I think there's there's no harm in stressing that particular point, but as I think was said, there's a timing issue here of when we best land that. So, I mean, there's no problem by doing this if we are, I suppose, taking a pretty public view that this is a real issue for all of us.
I mean, but the issue is we've been hearing them talk about this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it will be weeks and weeks and weeks, and nothing will have happened. And from the point of view of what's happening for the individual councils in Wellington Water, we should be leading the way. I tell you what, the rest of the country will jump behind you too, because they're all facing the same issues.
Mayor Bajan?
Yeah, look, Wayne, A, we've made it public, this is a public meeting, but B, if you want to draft a letter and distribute it amongst mayors, we can get it signed. Just do it outside of this.
Yeah, we can. So certainly with that recommendation, we're making clear our view as the water committee, what councils choose to do, particularly in that stance. And you've mentioned Mayor Guppy, Upper Hutt, maybe looking to take an approach. We can take that outside of this because it's also an opportunity to talk with our wider colleagues. Does that sound okay? Yep, great. So we'll just read out the words there. We'll put that on the screen. ICE officers to continue to stress to DIA the importance of recompensing councils and Wellington Water for the resources which will be required to support their reforms. Okay, so we'll add that as alongside the other recommendations. So 1 through to 6, I'll move them. Seconder? Oh, sorry, apologies, but you're happy to include that? Yep, great. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I declare that carried. Okay, thank you very much. Moving through to the Wellington Water draft statement of intent on page 34. So Wendy and I believe Fraser may be here to speak on this one as well, but I'll pass it over to you, Wendy.
Thanks. As you can see, there's been, not all councils have provided comments. There have been some comments, and the statement of intent has been strengthened around a range of issues. I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that it will be coming back once the comments are captured from today and from any subsequent input that we get for final approval at the 29th of July meeting. That's all. Happy to take questions.
Any questions? Mayor Bajan?
Yeah, thanks. If we could just note, it looks like South Wairarapa didn't provide feedback, but I think we said we have nothing to add. So if we could just clarify that from a public perspective, that we didn't ignore it.
We'll, yep, no, we'll make sure that's noted down. Thank you. Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay. Mayor Foster?
Yeah, look, sorry. I was just looking through the notes that I made. In clause 10 or paragraph 10, there's notes around the comments that we made about wanting those targeted growth investments being covered. Now, I note later on that that's intended to be delivered to us by the end of, or at least something by the end of June. So does that mean it's not covered within this SOI, or clearly there'll be further work to be done? Just wanted to get some clarity on that from Wellington Water Limited.
Comment on that?
I would have to go back and check exactly what has been drafted into the SOI, but certainly growth has been included in there. The specific wording, I'd have to go and check. Councillor Foster. Mayor Foster.
You're going back a long time. You're going back
Sorry.
a long time, Wendy, to when you were Officer Walker.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, so we've got the recommendations in front of us, which is 1 through to 6, and that is also including that we are directing Wellington Water on the changes sought to incorporate the feedback, including also through to the transition governance group with these recommendations. So I will move those. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Van Leer. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Item 10. which is the company update, and this is on page 43 of the agenda. So we have Colin and Linda to present on this one, and then we'll see if there's questions. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Mayor Barry. So I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about the context that we are all familiar with in terms of the challenges facing Wellington Water, as I'm sure the same challenges are facing all of you, around COVID-19, around the supply chain issues are of particular concern to us, around workforce and wanting to retain our staff, along with a number of other issues that we are all facing. So within that context and under guidance from the Water Committee, the board have focused or looked at the next 2 years of Wellington Water and really focused the next 2 years on providing our key services, on ensuring that we deliver on renewals and upgrades as per our CAPEX program. Ensuring that there's a seamless transition to Entity C is key, and that is around having a 3-year plan and a 10-year investment program that we can pass over to Entity C so that our customers maybe don't even know that there's been a transition. And I have to say, just as an aside, the board were very pleased to see the paper on the transition governance group that has been put up, and look forward to being involved and in the loop in terms of the reporting of that so that we can fulfil our governance duties. And finally, of course, looking after our people through transition. So the SOI that you have provided feedback on is really wanting to focus on those areas going into the next 2 years. We have added in a fluoride measure, so you will get regular reporting on that. And also you'll have in this SOI a clear plan for how we're going to be able to deliver within the investment that you councils have provided to us. So we have a new auditor and have met him, Clint. The issue that we have there is that the audit is going to be later than perhaps we had anticipated, but we will still be able to meet our statutory reporting requirements. I understand he's actually talking to councils about the same reporting timelines. Leanne Southey has taken over as the chair of our Audit and Risk Committee from Phil Barry, who is no longer on the board. So Q3, our performance has been satisfactory. We've had a really busy year, and we look forward to being able to continue to deliver great customer service. Our ratings have gone up from the average of 72% up to 84%. Within that really busy period, it was very pleasing to the board. The environmental performance at our wastewater treatment plants are continuing to improve. We've provided safe drinking water across the metropolitan Wellington area and continue to improve in South Wairarapa. And we are looking at delivering within the middle of the range for our CAPEX program. Again, a really pleasing result given the headwinds that we face. With regards to the fluoride inquiry, you will be aware now that the report has been delayed by around 4 weeks. We are very keen to get a thorough and comprehensive report, and the board is pleased to accept that, well, not pleased, but we're prepared to accept that sometimes there are external factors that we need to take into account. In this case, the inquiry has reviewed over 400 documents and has undertaken over 30 interviews, and some of those external interviews have been a little bit harder to arrange than had been anticipated, and that has caused the delay. It has not delayed the work that Wellington Water is doing on getting fluoride back on track, and we were very pleased to receive the funding approval from Greater Wellington this week. So we will be coming back to the Water Committee with the report that will include the findings and our response to those findings in early July, late June, so around 4 weeks away. I think that is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin.
I wasn't going to add anything else other than to say that the 3 papers that follow are emphasising some of the points we want to make in the company report, so we can probably deal with the most important issues then. We've got our team here.
Okay, any questions? Mayor Foster.
Yeah, Yeah, look, I had a number, if I can. If stop me if you feel somebody else needs to have a go, but I've got about 6 or 7. First one of them was just going through the report. On 6, you've got a comment there about customer service, and you did cover that, Linda. Just wanted, we've had a bit of discussion with the Wellington City Council about customer service loops. In other words, somebody raises a concern about something, they get given a ticket, which is a lovely term, and then it disappears into the black hole of council or Wellington Water, and then eventually something happens. I had the experience of doing that with Wellington Water. A Wellington Water issue relatively recently. 5 or 6 weeks later, I had heard absolutely nothing, and then it got fixed. I guess the point is, what is the process that we're going through to let people know how things are going when they raise something, and what the time frame is that it's going to take to address that concern, and if there's any complexities around it, because it just feels like a lot of these, the feedback to the person who raises a concern, member of the public who raises a concern, isn't what I would hope it would be.
Oh, yes. Mayor Foster, there's an improvement program that's now underway between Wellington City Council and Wellington Water to construct some harmonisation between the way the calls come into the call centre and the way they get to our hub and the way they follow through. In terms of the way the process we lay out for recognising them, calling them back and checking through with them, I think is well established. And so my hope is in the next 3 months, as we work through that process, some of the gaps in there can be ironed out, and we can improve that service overall for the customer. So it's a work in progress, but we're focused on it. Oh,
look, that's good to hear, and I look forward to seeing that that improvement in place.
And I think, can I just what I'd say is that the level of service laid out in terms of what customers can experience is clear. What is the trouble is sometimes we end up with gaps in that process, and that's what we're trying to close.
Yeah, I think it is just letting people know what's going on when they raise something. That's the key there. It's not whether the work's done or not done. The second one I wanted to raise, which is just to say, hey, well done. I think the workforce capability in 23 that sounds brilliant. Any lessons from it? Things that you go, that was brilliant. Areas you could improve, doing it again, those sort of things.
Our experience has been excellent in this place. It's been a good idea, and we'll do it again. The one thing that has come out of the reflection on it is that sometimes, there's been a couple of those people who've gone through the program, who have chosen to do something else and weren't fully hooked up on being, working in the Three Waters space. So what we've got to do at the front end of the program is probably give them more experience around what they're doing, so they can clearly see what the foresighted work will be. And if they don't think it's for them, they can choose to make that decision before the program happens. But you're always going to get the odd person going through. But the real problem here is that this is just a small contribution to what is a massive problem for Three Waters businesses and New Zealand. That we're just not getting enough people on the front line with the right skills to do the work. And it's still a big problem for us. So anything we can do in this area is good.
Look, I think anything we could do perhaps to promote that will be a good thing as well, so that more people are aware of the program. The next area I wanted to ask about was in 35 and 36, I think, the 30-year strategy. And it's talked about being confusing, but I would have thought we wanted a long-term strategy for delivery of capital investment program to guide the new water entity as and when it's established, so that it's got a bit of a feel for where it's going and what's important to the region. Why wouldn't we want to have something that actually says this is what's important over the next medium to long term for supporting growth and levels of service, etc.
speak on behalf of the committee, but Campbell here, but this committee has been through a process of constructing a 30-year plan for Three Waters. Once that's been completed, I guess what this is just highlighting is passing that over to the NTUs is a good thing to do, but you know, there's a lot of good work in there and how to think about how that becomes more visible to everyone. So there's no sense that it hasn't been done and it won't be handed over, Andy. It's just, you know, the good work we expected to do to use it as a enabler for the 24-34 LTP has been usurped somewhat by the creation of the you know, water reform.
Okay, so there were some comments made about it being seen as being confusing, so that's not preventing that work.
No, I think the best
having an ongoing life.
I think the best thing we can do is just provide a copy to the member chair.
Okay, that's cool. Two other ones if I can. In 37 and 38, you talk about the land development side, and I'm going to be I'm really interested in seeing what you've got. Obviously, that's very close to being ready. So, here putting my Wellington City hat on, you will have that information to Wellington City next month. Is that correct? And what is it? What's it going to do? What's it going to tell us?
Do we know?
We're working with the Wellington City Council officers.
Andy, my understanding is we're working with your officers to provide that information.
Can I just say that that's probably one that you just take up directly through your council?
I'll do that, but I'm just wanting to know that they're going to hit that timeline because that's important to us.
No, I absolutely agree. Just in regards to the forum, because otherwise we could all open up a line of questioning along those lines.
No. Like I don't want to do that at this stage, so we'll take that up later on, Colin. And look, the final one I had was in 42. I think I understand what you're saying there, but you said changes to housing regulations that impact how we plan water servicing. Is this the enabling increased supply of housing legislation that went through in the last year?
Yes. Yep. So,
yeah. Okay. So can you just tell us what that means for water supply generally? I suspect I know, but it'd be good to hear it from the horse's mouth.
I'm not sure. Are we in a position to do that reasonably or not? Generally. Oh, generally. Okay. Cool.
Thanks, Andy. I guess the challenge with us on that intensification stuff is that where we were working very closely with councils on growth in identified areas, that change means that intensification can happen pretty much anywhere, and so it's going to have implications for how we plan future growth investment. And I think you can see that I think the changes impacting on various councils' own district planning processes, trying to understand what the consequences of that are. So in general terms, it's going to make it, obviously recognise the need for new development, but some changes for us in infrastructure planning that we'll just have to continue to work with, and continue also to focus on the growth planning that each council is doing with us.
And have you, just final question on that one, have you had a look at what Auckland is doing, which I understand, I may be wrong on this, but I understand is to use infrastructure potentially as a qualifying matter under the National Policy Statement and the enabling housing legislation?
We probably have to come back to you on that one, but I know that sort of thing was explored and was part of our submissions. Select committee. So.
No, thank you, as it should have been. Thank you.
Councillor Van Leer.
My questions have actually been answered through the course of Mayor Foster's questioning, and the other two can wait for different agenda items.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. In relation to bullet point 10, the very first sentence, July 21st this year, Ministry of Health will be responsible for fluoridation of drinking water. What does that mean in relation to the role that we all play here?
Yesterday, the Greater Wellington Regional Council provided funding to get the fluoride back on as it's relatively running a level of service which reflects the decision by local authorities in the past to fluoridate the water generally within the guidelines of the Ministry of Health. From 1 July, the Director General of Health has the authority to require fluoridation, and we expect them to introduce a performance measure rather than a guideline, and that performance measure will require water suppliers to deliver the fluoridation inside that range, but no less than 95% of the time. And so that will require some evaluation by us on behalf of councils around how to achieve that. And we're going to work our way through that and represent that back to the Greater Wellington Regional Council in the 22-23 financial year. And we'll be able to update you on what that means, but it also means there will be some attention on the Petone and Korokoro greater suburbs around whether or not they should be fluoridated or not.
Yeah. So being it under the Ministry of Health now, is it their role to monitor, will they be monitoring the health of people as well? Is that part of their criteria, do you know?
Yeah.
About their teeth and everything like that?
Yeah, well, they do that now through RPH, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And when do we expect it to actually take place for those areas? Will it be next year or as of that date?
Well, as I read it, the requirement is that you must, from 1 July, you must not stop fluoridating if you are, and then it's a question at what pace will they move to require for the areas where it isn't currently being fluoridated. That's unclear.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Linda, Colin, on that one. So I'll note that the committee will move that the committee receives the report. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Baker. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, moving through to the Water Services Investment Update. This is on page 60. So we have Julie Alexander and the team as well presenting on this paper. So I'll pass it over to you. Thanks.
Got to wait for the green light. Thank you, Mayor Barry. In July last year, we brought you a forecast of what your investment would be providing over the next 3 years. And we said that after a long time of underinvestment in the assets, that the significant level of investment that the whole region had provided was a very good start for us to try and build back those strong networks. But it would take a long time. So that was a clear message that we started the last year, the 3 years that we've got for this LTP. And what this paper sets out are some of the challenges that our board chair has already shared with you, and that some of the successes that are also in the company report. If I could give a high level sort of statement, I'd say that we've made progress, but there are challenges and issues. Some of those we anticipated have got more significant because of the circumstances and the context. We are providing a more fulsome report back to you in July. The challenge for us is going to be the operational expenditure. It is a challenge for everybody. It is the investment that allows us to do the more proactive part of the asset management around condition assessment, plan maintenance, and investigations, which set us up well for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? We're just here for questions. Yep. Okay. Questions from members. Councillor Van Leer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I was wondering if you could just give me a quick refresher around some of the work programs to do with carbon emission reductions and adaptations, and where those lie, what parts of the business and what actions Wellington Water could take. And second question would be just broadly, if you were to get 100% of the funding you required as of the next financial year, what would be the timeframes we're looking at for those issues raised in paragraphs 16 and 17 around water security, water quality and climate change?
Fraser.
Thanks, Councillor. I guess the first one on climate change, if we take mitigation emission reductions first, our emissions profile, a big piece of electricity consumption, obviously all the pumping in particular, but aeration and other activities is a pretty big piece. Increasingly, what's called fugitive emissions from wastewater treatment. Emerging science, but we don't know the actual numbers, but potentially quite a significant source of emissions. This is nitrous oxide in particular that's released from the treatment process. We have emissions from the dryer at Seaview, which dries biosolids with natural gas, and then emissions from the biosolids that are disposed of in the landfill that breaks down into methane, some of which is collected at the landfill but otherwise lost to atmosphere. Those are the main ones. In terms of activities, not a huge amount has been funded in the current LTPs. We have an ongoing program of energy efficiency work that happens in our operations teams to sort of improve pump performance and things, which makes a useful contribution to us. What else is happening? We are doing some work investigating options for the Seaview dryer to see that it will be needing a replacement at a certain point, and just trying to understand different ramifications about changing fuel source, changing dryer, and potentially sort of bigger picture challenges around or approaches to managing wastewater treatment and biosolids. Wellington is proceeding with the sludge minimisation project, which will have under their work program, other than under theirs, but that's got, I think it's about a reduce the solids disposal, capture some biogas for use in the process, quite a significant reduction in emissions there. But at this stage, nothing in the pipeline, so to speak, for Seaview and Porirua. The wastewater emissions, so it's a big challenge for the sector as a whole. We were just talking about that at the conference yesterday, the need to try and take some measurements, and there's global experience, but the first thing we probably need to do is try and do some measurements ourselves, but that would require some funding. So potentially options to look at renewable generation as well, so things like solar panels and the like. So opportunities, but not too much. We have got a piece of work that's underway at the moment to try and develop a roadmap, something that was partially funded with stimulus funding, partially funded with in the management fee, which is to revise our emissions inventory and to try and establish a roadmap of investments that we can then look to put into investment planning processes, and we can share that with everybody, say this looks like the pathway, and as things change we'll go from there. So we were hoping to finish that, well, it's probably going to be early in the next financial year that would have that. The other thing we're working on at the moment is the emissions from our capital program, so all the concrete and steel and things in the construction process. We have just about finished baselining the emissions from that work program using the current, the LTP work program. The intention is to look at that and see what the opportunities around different programs of work might be to reduce emissions. And so as we work through that, we can sort of look what's happening there. So those are the main ones around mitigation. On adaptation, on the water supply, we have a model that takes into account climate change forecasts. We're in the process of updating that at the moment. We've probably got across climate change generally, that's probably the best place of our understanding. We're in pretty good shape, we think, on understanding what the implications are, and it's not, it's probably better for, that's for the Wellington Metro region. Pretty good understanding of the situation there that we can build into our modelling process. We are doing a piece of work looking at climate change risk for the Seaview wastewater treatment plant, recognising its location in actually the whole network we decided to look at rather than just the treatment plant, with the treatment plant and the outfall pipe in particular in the coastal area. So that's underway at the moment, and that was, and we'd probably look to, we're using that as a bit of a chance to sort of understand how we might go about that work and probably approach other councils about doing similar work as we start to understand it, recognising it's becoming more and more of an issue. So I think that's climate change. Hopefully that's everything. On the water supply, I've sort of set out in paper, and in the last meeting, we continue to have challenges with rising demand, particularly around leakage and to some degree with growth. And we can see that we'll alleviate some of that with the Timarua optimisation project, which will provide for more capacity to utilise the lakes, but then within a few years at current forecast that we'll be back into an issue with meeting the 1 in 50 year drought resilience standard. You've proposed Greater Wellington funding for us to continue work in both of those areas in the LTP, and we'd be looking to split that funding between continuing to look at working towards proposing further investment in smart meters, and towards, if we need to, investing in the expansion of the Timarua Lakes using the land that Greater Wellington acquired for that purpose. So that would be, so we've got, as we move forward, options either way or both, and are ready to invest. And that would be something what we've proposed to Greater Wellington was that something we'd look to include be included in the entity asset management plan as something for it. But there's still and that's an area of it's not unclear how that asset management plan will be developed and presented and consulted. That still seems to be a work in progress, but that's our intent to try and keep on advancing our knowledge towards being able to make an investment one way or the other, probably in reality under the new entity that will happen, we think, but we'll give them the information and understanding they need to do that and to engage councils and communities if need be. Hopefully that's...
Thank you. We have Mia Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Three questions if I can. The first one, in a couple of places in the report, it's noted how much the cost of doing a renewal work is rising. We've just been through the process where we've had an astronomical increase in the valuations of the assets on the basis of the cost of renewing them, and I just wondered how broadly that is across the 6 councils that Wellington Water looks after.
My understanding is we're seeing a similar impact across everywhere, and so at the conference yesterday, John Lamont from Watercare was showing similarly very high numbers, no cost increase below 20% across the board from all of their activities. In terms of asset valuations, I think that's a discussion that's being had with each council and different councils, just making decisions around how to best apply. Does the current cost reflect an ongoing, something that's going to stay, or is it short term? And so some different approaches, I think, being taken on that. Julie, you might have some more.
So is your thinking that this is something which is temporary, or you're thinking that this is something which is a fundamental reset of the cost of delivering water infrastructure?
If I answered that question, I would only I would do it without all the knowledge. So I'd like to come back to the committee on that, because I think it's going to be relevant for everybody.
Yeah, okay. And do you know if that's been built into water reforms as well?
So the discussion, so the NTU presented a couple of times at the conference, and there's questions asked about funding and valuations. That work still is ongoing, so I'm not sure how it's being reflected in there, but lots of analysis still going on.
Yeah, okay, cool. The second aspect of this is when we look at, I think this will be true for every council again, the massive already a massive difference between renewals and depreciation across the board. This change in the asset values makes that even greater. You'd think if that was the case, and this has been going for decades, that the actual performance of the water network would be far worse. The Three Waters network would be far worse than it actually is. So when you're doing condition assessment, which is also alluded to in the report, are you seeing that the assets are likely to be lasting longer than might have been originally expected? Because you kind of feel that if they were lasting the length of time that was expected, given the level of renewals against depreciation, that the whole system would have fallen apart by now.
It's the answer is probably it depends.
Correct.
We have
my answer.
We have assets that have been in the ground for a very long time that are still in excellent condition. We have assets that have been in the ground that are failing, that shouldn't be failing. Some of it might be to do with materials, some of it might be to do with construction, some of it might be to do with there's any range. And so that's part of our condition, especially with the VHCA and high criticality asset processes, trying to understand risks associated with different types of asset and reflect that into the types of assessment we do. So, and then different ages. So there's probably, I'd imagine, an older average age for the asset fleet in Wellington compared to some of the other councils. So that the impact of different depreciation models there's a different factor there around sort of baseline age as well. So, so we're trying to reflect it in our programs.
So the condition assessment should ultimately drive the asset lives and therefore the depreciation.
Probably something for the accountants.
Yeah, I think that it does. The better data you have on your assets, the more accurate you can assess the value of them.
Yeah. Good. Okay, that makes sense ultimately. Okay, and look, my final question is, you mentioned smart meters, and there's obviously a comment about water supply and water loss. And somewhere in the papers also I noted the work that's been done on water metering. Is that still progressing through Wellington Water over the next couple of years? And so where's that going to be taken?
As mentioned just a bit earlier, Greater Wellington have provided some funding for us to do work on mitigating that summer demand risk, and some of that is being to progress work on the metering further as well as source expansion.
So is that area meters, smart area meters, or is that going beyond that into more universal metering being thought about?
So we're progressing from the strategic case that we presented to the committee, when was that? A couple of years ago, I think, that identified that the option that had the future value was smart meters for each connection.
Right. Okay. So that's proceeding.
So, so the area meters wouldn't. Well, there's some benefit, but not to the full extent of. Full metering.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Bajan.
Yeah, thanks. My question is aligned with Andy's first one. So as councils, we are dealing in hundreds of different areas with financial pressures. And when we plan, we include a projection of increased costs into our budgets that we go to the public and we get funding for. And we're very inflexible thereafter. So the question really is, what assumptions assumptions have not been included by Wellington Water when they set their SOIs and the required funds to achieve a projected program of work? And because you can't come to councils and say, we have had a 20% blowout in BAU, accepting emergencies, and expect councils to have the money to fund that. What can you do better at this in this area to ensure that you deliver the SOI BAU without having to keep coming back for more money?
when we presented the draft SOI in March, we said that we would provide the final when all of the budgets were set for the next 2 years, and that's all on track. So by the 30th of June, when councils provide their annual planned budgets, then we can report our, report our performance for the following 2 years. We have agreed with all councils that we have discussed what the needs of the network are and the costs of that, and we will agree realistic budgets that you provide, and then we'll give you a risk assessment of what that means in terms of what might not be excluded, and then we're committed to delivering the services inside those budgets with full transparency on any changes that occur. So if we get something that changes significantly that wasn't predicted and costs go up, then we'll explain to you how we're going to manage those services back within the budget, so you have full visibility of that. That's the approach that we're going to conduct over the next 2 years. So for an example, for the South Wairarapa, for members across, which was very common for everybody, is to what degree have we priced emergency works inside our budgets? And the Tauhara Nico project, for example, which was unplanned expenditure through an emergency, is that inside budgets and you want us to adjust level of service, or are you going to fund that separately? Those are the sorts of conversations we would expect to have with councils right throughout the next 2 years, on the basis that you set the funding.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. I did actually say excluding emergency, and we can cope with that. However, to receive $1 million bills for BAU with no warning, as I've said, and I've said to you individually, is we are inflexible in this area. So really, and I note in point 30 that you are working on planning, but we really need to firm up that a budget is able to take into account fluctuations in the market, and these are accounted for in what we are putting aside for your services.
Yep. Well, for the next 2 years, Alex, we're very clear about that, and that's the way we're approaching your officers in council, and we understand how that will operate in the next 2 years. So I accept what you're saying, and that's the way we're going to operate. And councils are at varying degrees of confirming their budgets with us, but it's all going to plan.
Thank you, Colin.
Any other questions? Yep.
Seeing I'm just sitting here. Just taking that 30-year infrastructure plan, strategy, and some of the questions that Fraser's answered, we envisage in our minds that we will produce a transition risk profile for the committee, that you can see the risks that we're worried about and you're worried about, and what happens to them over the next 2 years as they get passed over to the water reform. So, for example, the water security risk, which is getting worse over the next 2 years, and we are actually playing back out into water reform, having that really transparent for you to understand where that sits at subsequent meetings, so they're all listed and you can talk to them, I think is a good idea. So we'll make sure that's there, and that'll enable a better frame of reference to have the sort of chats you're having. Yep.
I think that's an excellent idea, and I can see nods around the table as you're explaining that. That will be really helpful for us. Yep. Great. Okay, no further questions? So we'll move through to the recommendations, which are in front of us. They are just noting recommendations 1 through to 7. I'll move them. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Van Leer, is there any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Okay, drinking water regulation update. Charles. This is on page 68 of the agenda. If you have any overarching comments, Charles, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Member Barry. The update provides assurance to the committee that as we navigate the transition to the new standards and the new regulator and the new rules, that Wellington Water will maintain an unbroken record of independent verification of our compliance. It's complicated now by indications from the regulator that the standards and rules won't be ready for the 1st of July. So that extends this uncertain period where we're operating under the old set of rules and regulations with a new regulator while we wait for the new rules and regulations. To ensure the committee has full visibility during this period, Wellington Water will now provide a quarterly drinking compliance report to augment the quarter report. This will include a fluoride measure, but I would stress that this no way replaces any requirement for us to immediately inform you of anything that impacts on safe drinking water. In short, the update gives confidence that despite reform, regulator change, Wellington Water keeps its eye on the balls of its very core business of providing safe drinking water to all our customers. I'm happy to take any questions, Mayor Barry.
Is there any questions? Deputy Mayor Swales.
Thank you for your report. What I'd like to, my question refers back to page 47, where you talked about the updates of regulations, where you did talk about Te Mata Arawai and their timeline. So as you've agreed, there was even a statement there saying that it may not be ready until January 2023 where they land. So are we still working with their draft rules to make sure that the transition, when they do finally land, that there's not going to be a huge jump, that we are working with, you know, the framework until it is confirmed?
Yes, that's one of the things the regulators are facing now, is that they have to give us enough time with the final rules before they're implemented to let us have a reasonable amount of time to make changes. So we're still working across with the councils and to ensure that we are readying ourselves for compliance with the draft rules, but we're caveating that with that the draft, depending on what changes they make until the final version is available, we don't want to overinvest, because that could, in a range of testing or compliance measures, we don't want to waste any council's money if the standard is going to lower or be more pragmatic. So that's where we look at the moment. There's some indications they might bring the rules in force in November, but promulgate the final versions in July 1st now. So that will give us a few months.
Thank you, Chair. So with that in mind, do you anticipate that there could be a funding requirement or extra funding requirement from each of the councils to meet where they land?
Yes, but that's an ongoing piece of work that we've been foreshadowing what the likely major changes would be, and we've been working to put those through the normal planning process to ensure that I could give an example if that's useful. For the South Wire Rapid, there could be a change to the level of treatment potentially that we have to do to their sources, but depending on the final rule, that may or may not occur. So there's only so far we can go with our planning to be prepared and highlight it as a risk.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sorry, yes, Mayor Bajan.
I'll jump ahead of you, Andy. I'm just
Not a problem.
I'm just confirming that the sample reports are just made up data as opposed to actual. That's correct?
That's very correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just surprised to see we were fluoridating water with the South Wire Rapid.
No, they're just bare reports to give you an indication. The full report would be much more comprehensive in terms of the number of sources.
Mayor Foster.
So am I taking from this that lots of lovely green ticks actually aren't actually real green ticks, even if they are real green ticks?
That's correct, Mayor Foster.
Right. Okay. Look, just the one question I've got is in terms of the regulations as they develop. I mean, my understanding is that our drinking water, certainly across the urban area, has been A grade quality, with the exception of the areas which have not been treated by choice for probably all of our lifetimes. Are the regulations, as we see them being drafted, looking as though they're making sense? And in terms of setting sensible standards as opposed to not sensible standards, and both for the urban area and then separately interested in the rural area, where, as I understand it, very, very small groupings of dwellings may constitute a water supply system, and then the standards become potentially much higher than they have been historically. Can you just talk us through those, please?
Yes, I can, Mayor. The standards is, when we say the standards, we refer to the actual composition of the water that has to be achieved. That's set under legislation. That's very pragmatic. They've used very standard World Health Organization level things to determine what safe drinking water is. The other things they promulgate themselves is the assurance rules. How you may produce very good water, but did you do it safely in a way that is achievable long term and lowers the risk? So just measuring the water isn't enough. So they have all these assurance rules, and that's where we get into the detail of they have different levels of assurance for supply and treatment and distribution, and different requirements depending on the scale of the number of the population that water network serves. They are in line with world standards that you could expect that there's an expectation that we improve continuously our ability to measure and demonstrate that we can make safe water and we have enough supply. And what I think you're honing in on there, Mayor, is that one of the categories for the second level, the population limit's quite high, or quite low, depending on how you look at it. So South Wairarapa towns come under quite onerous assurance rules. So that's the activity, how many times we've got to measure everything, what do we have to measure, how long are we sampling, how much do we have to prove. That's quite a high bar. There's indications that they're looking at changing that population level, and we were optimistic that that would come in at a level which would lower the assurance activity that we had to do for the South Wairarapa. But anecdotal feedback from some of the working groups is that it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So for the metropolitan area, there's not a lot of significant change, but for the South Wairarapa, the assurance activities that we have to undertake are quite a lot more.
So that sounds like an ongoing debate around where you've got, and I can understand why you might have a standard for a town, but where it's a handful of farms or whatever it might be which are attached to each other. What you're saying is that's still under discussion about what standards and particularly what assurance standards are required.
I should make it clear that the small suppliers, while I keep a kind of a weather watch on those rules, they're not rules that we, as a large supplier, come under. There's a little bit outside my thing, but I can see from the feedback from that's been given on the assurance rules that it sounds like there's pragmatism starting to come into the rules. And one of the delays in promulgating the rules is probably they're putting that in for the small suppliers, but we all have to wait for that to come through.
Thank you. We'll watch that one with interest.
Okay, any other questions? Comment, Colin?
I'd just like to clarify one point from the question. When we were talking about additional funding there, Charles, just checking with you, we're talking about if there's anything changes from what we don't know now, we'd have to think about how we deal with that. But everything that we know now is within our current funding stream, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay, no other questions? Thank you very much. So we'll move the recommendations again, noting recommendations 1 through to 4. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Van Leer. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Moving through the wastewater treatment update. Jeremy and Colin, pass it over.
Not used to Jeremy's news, but just say that in the company report, if I'd said something about this has been a really big piece of work for us, and it's starting to run pretty well, and it's good to see some increased reporting. So over to you, Jeremy.
Right, thanks, Mayor Barry. So yeah, the implementing of the recommendations is going very well. You'll see we're about 50% of the way through. We've provided dashboards on all of the wastewater treatment plants to provide improved transparency on the treatment plants, and you'll see from them the 4 metropolitan wastewater treatment plants, the output is significantly improved. So the environmental outcomes have significantly improved, and we're on track for achieving compliance for the last remaining plant, which is the Seaview plant. Expecting that by mid-June, as forecast earlier. So yeah, just open up for any questions, really.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Van Leer.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Colin. Appreciate the work done on the dashboard, and it looks like it's going along really well. I do have a question around paragraph 11, under the current risks bit, with the clarifier bearing. I just was wondering if you could speak to what needs to happen over that 9-month period, because I have no technical expertise in this, but that does sound like a long amount of time to replace a bearing. And I guess I'm wondering as well if that speaks to the need, if we need some further redundancy in that system, given if one goes offline and the likely events of heavy rainfall could put consent compliant in the abatement notice at risk, and what is Wellington Water's plan to deal with that eventuality as well during this period of fixing that up?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. The bearing that we're talking about here is it's actually a main drive as well, so it's not a small bearing. It's about 1.5 metres in diameter. It's getting manufactured overseas, so that is actually the time to manufacture it. The question of redundancy, we're actually getting 3 manufactured, so there's 3 clarifiers on site. So we will be ascertaining whether the other 2 need to be done with similar urgency. And when we do, if we do turn out to need to do those ones, we'll be doing them over the summer period, so we reduce those risks of the plant having to bypass. So.
There's a broader question in there around redundancy to meet growth, Councillor. So these plants are being sized for a certain amount of throughput, and all plants in the metropolitan area, and we're growing quite significantly. So it's chewing into any redundancy in the plant's capacity to go offline and then continue to meet its environmental performance. So a bigger question that we're dealing with all councils is what's the right size for those plants into the future, and what's the timing for the upgrade, so that you continue to meet the environmental performance of them. And as you say, even if you have an issue, you can cope with that issue and not have problems.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear. I guess the final part of that question, I was just wondering though, is through this 9-month period while these bearings are being manufactured, is there a plan in place to deal with the likely outcomes of sort of negative impacts on the environment whilst that 3rd clarifier is offline, just through heavy rain periods, which is identified in the report?
So we're looking at any potential negative impacts on the environment. So that's one stream of work. There is also improved communication protocols that we're rolling out for that, just to let the public, the water users know if there's been a bypass. So yeah, they're the 2 main things that we're doing at the moment, just to mitigate it.
Okay, thank you.
It's important to know that when that the 3rd clarifier is needed to meet the environmental performance when we have pulses of rain, and so the fixing's taking longer because of some of the supply problems. But you would imagine that if that was a quick fix, you would have managed it inside the 90-day rolling average, which is why it does that. But in this case, the repair is so long that it's likely to impact in the future performance, and there's not much we can do about that.
Any other questions, Mayor Foster?
Yeah, same issue. If I could just check what conversations are being had with the regional council in terms of compliance and hopefully understanding, taking a pragmatic approach to you're doing your best you can to try and get this thing dealt with and replaced, but it's going to take the time it takes.
I just answer that question. We foster at a relationship level. We're working really hard with our relationship with the regulator, and as we work through with them, any compliance issue for them is being clear and transparent around the performance of the plants and what we're doing about that as quickly as possible to bring it back online. And we feel we're at that position with the Greater Wellington Regional Council at the moment, but they can still, I guess, stand back and insist on the performance against the consents. And if we're not doing that, we have to have a conversation. But I can assure you that the transparency and the availability of information that flows to the regulator now, in my opinion, is as best as it's ever been.
What you're telling us, and presumably telling them, is that if the plant's out, or that clarifier is out, and then the level of flow into the system is such that the other clarifiers can't cope, there is nothing you can do about it. Is that right, or is there something you can do about it?
That's right. You've got to be really clear about what is going to happen if those rainfall events occur, and they have to understand that to oversee their consent requirements. But at the end of the day, they still have the right to require us to comply. So you've summarised the situation.
What you're saying is potentially you can't.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, no, thank you. So we'll move through to the recommendations, which is receiving the report, notes the good progress on the wastewater treatment plant review, and endorses the new reporting method for reporting wastewater treatment plant environmental performance. Do I have a seconder for that? Mayor Foster, go to the screen. And any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Colin. Okay, so moving through to the committee forward program. So is there any questions in regards to this? This is on page 92. It's pretty straightforward. Yep. Happy? Okay. So I'll just move that the committee receives and notes the forward program. Have a seconder. Mayor Bajan, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Declare that carried. And we're just going to take a 1 minute, just for a moment. So we are going to just work through a minor item not on the agenda, if that's okay. So I'll just make sure we get, this is just in regards to a change of representation with Nadida Hooper. So if we just take 1 minute and we'll just get that lined up to make sure we cover that off properly. So we'll come back in a minute. Thank you. Great. Okay, thanks everyone. We're just making sure we get the item right. So I'll just move that we have a minor item not on the agenda, just in regards to a change of representation. So I'll just move that. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Baker, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no, declare that carried. So I'll just hand it over to Wendy Walker just to cover this off and then go into it. Thanks.
Councillors, mayors, councillors, you'll all be aware that when we allowed for mana whenua representation on this committee, we had both Ngāti Tora and Port Nicholson put forward formal representation, but at that time the Wairarapa iwi were not in a position to be able to put forward nominations. So Narada Hooper, who is on the screen there, from South Wairarapa Māori Standing Committee, agreed to come in and fill that position in the interim while that process was being worked through. So we are on the cusp of being able to formalise that, and I will be going over to the Wairarapa to meet with that, with both Ngāti Kahungunu and Rangatane. But Andrea Rutine has agreed to stand in on the committee now for Ngāti Kahungunu. So I imagine that means that this is Narrative's last meeting. But we will be bringing back the formalities around that as we work through them. But I just wanted to highlight that to the committee.
Okay, so just as those formalities get done, I think it's just a case of noting and endorsing that change. Is there anything that you'd like to say, Narita? On that end, really, from I just really want to acknowledge and thank you for your contribution into the committee, but I'll just pass it over to you if there's anything you'd like to add or any further comments.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to have a quick chat. Yes, just to formalise this in the right way for Ngāti Kahununu's representation. So really pleased that Andrea will be stepping forward to do that. She'll be of value to this committee, and I'm more than happy to be maybe an observer if that's agreeable by South Wairarapa District Council and the committee, mostly because I'm also in other levels of meetings with South Wairarapa District Council in representation of the Māori Standing Committee. So I still feel that I can contribute and maybe be a conversation for Andrea and I and in those spaces. But yes, good luck to the committee. It is exciting. I do like the space. It's tricky, it's got peaks and troughs, but it's quite. I feel quite privileged to be around this conversation as it's going forward, as it's quite monumental for New Zealand. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and thank you for that offer as well, to be able to support and be part of this kaupapa. So that's certainly a good conversation for us to have as Wendy comes over to the Wairarapa and also with the team there. So yep, that's great. So so we've got a recommendation to put on the. Okay, so I'll move that we note
Andrea Rutine.
Okay, so I'm just making sure I get the wording right. Andrea Rutine from Ngāti Kahungunu will replace Narita Hooper on the Water Committee and notes that the Chief Executive responsible for Wellington Water will be meeting over in the Wairarapa to discuss representation and formalising arrangements further in regards to mana whenua representation. Does that sound good? Okay. Great, so I'll move that to a seconder. Mayor Bajan, great. Thank you very much. So I'll put that to any discussion. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Great, thank you very much. So we'll move through to the exclusion of the public.
Put some in mine. Oh, just.
Okay. Well, how about we take a 10-minute recess? Is that okay? But what I'll do first, I'll just move to the exclusion of the public. Yep. So I'll move that the public be excluded with the following parts, namely the minutes from the public excluded minutes from the 18th of March and appointment of director to the Wellington Water Board. Yep. So I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Van Leer. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. We will just take a 5 to 10 minute recess as Mayor Guppy puts money in the meter and as we turn off the live stream. So thanks.